You've had a good run, I called, and I grinned. I'm so very sad to see you go. But the time has come, old north wind, to bring your breezes elsewhere to blow. Thank you for painting the soft winter dawn, for wispy hues of orange and pink, for blankets and steaming hot cups of tea. Into that book I can pleasantly sink. But I must say your welcome has ended. The songbirds have returned to the trees. Peepers called loudly from the swamp in the night, and insects have returned to the breeze. So take yourself north to the mountains. Blow across the tundras and seas. Let us welcome the south wind to beaches and forests, whose warmth is so needed, oh please. Come back to visit in summer, when we need relief from the heat. You can slide on down for the evening, when we're outside wilted and beat. April has arrived and we're hungry for the greens to burst into air, to laugh in the warmth of the sunshine and find fresh grass stuck in our hair. You've had a good run, I sighed, and I grinned. I'm so very sad to see you go. And I turned up my heels and headed back home, as the treetops sang spring, let your warm winds now blow. Happy Wednesday, y'all. Happy April Fool's Day. So what's going on in the news? Good question, all of you. A lot. So jumping right into it, yesterday the government had some fairly dire predictions for the United States. The expectation is that, as it says here, 100 to 240,000 Americans could die. So this is a very serious situation. There's going to be a lot of really tragic situations. So the more we can expect that to be happening, the better prepared we can be. Obviously, one of the big impacts of the coronavirus has been the economy. And the government right now is looking at a jobs program. So during the Great Depression, the United States began a few works projects. Probably the best known is the WPA, Works Progress Administration. And that was responsible for building bridges and roads and sidewalks all throughout the United States. And President Trump, from the beginning, has been talking about an infrastructure plan. Across the United States, we have a lot of bridges and roads that are crumbling and need repair. So it looks like Democrats and Republicans are both agreeing that the economic fallout of this is going to be pretty bad. And this could be one way that's going to help Americans both get back to work and get some money in their pockets. Now, certainly the most devastating part of the virus is the human toll of the people that are sick, of the people that are dying. And this is probably a time where scientists have been working together hand in hand across the planet for one cause. Now, certainly some folks are doing it in different ways than others. I don't suggest this one. This guy was trying to create a device which would prevent your hand from touching your face with magnets. Now, sadly, he got those magnets stuck in his nose and had to go to the hospital to get those removed. So, for everyone, please don't touch your nose with magnets because they might get stuck in there. So, we don't still know how coronavirus occurred in humans, but we do know that it came from animals. And that's how most flu viruses and other viruses come to humans is through animal transfer. So the normal flu usually comes from some chickens, from turkeys. We have the swine flu. So we have a lot of diseases that come from close contact with animals. And with the exotic wildlife trade, a lot of those diseases that exist in these animals can have a greater chance of getting into the human population. I called in this week to my buddy Lee McLaughlin. He is a conservationist and filmmaker. We met when I was living in Belize in Central America for 2 years, and Lee was working for a conservation group called Shea. And later he started working for the organization Wildlife Conservation Society. So called in to Lee, who is living currently with his wife in Oviedo, Spain. And Lee, what's going on?
We're in a city in northern Spain. The province is called Asturias, and the city is Oviedo. It's about 200,000 people, so like a kind of low to middle-sized city, quite compact. It's really nice here. Quite, I would say, quite developed, really.
Okay.
It's quite a well-off city. Everything seems to be provided, and one of the big surprises for me is just how compliant everybody is with all of the rules that have come down. So, we went from being able to have freedom of movement to it's like, okay, everybody stays home. Only necessary trips from one place to another. And then all of a sudden the streets are filled with more police cars and military vehicles than anything else. And everybody complies, everybody lines up at the supermarket 1.5 meters away from each other. And it's just, everybody's just flipped and just done that, And I think to myself, would other places respond in the same way? I mean, my hometown in England, I don't think people are that good at it. The British have the reputation for being good and orderly and whatever, but I don't know, man. It's different depending on where you go. Because Sweden is another country that hasn't adopted the same measures as other countries. They've gone for this herd immunity approach. I guess they don't want to shut down their economy. That's the other big thing coming out of all of this is the primacy of economy over all other things, right?
Yeah.
We start to maybe realize, maybe the economy isn't everything.
Yeah, human health. We actually do value that a lot.
Some politicians and economists are actually suggesting that maybe we should protect the economy, and maybe the losses, yes, they're bad, but we should just take them. And you think to yourself, what if it's your mother? Or, I just don't understand how they can be so cold about that kind of thing.
Have you been hearing any pushback towards conservation groups?
The response I've seen from the bigger NGOs has been to kind of try and use the source of this COVID-19 being wildlife markets as a kind of leverage point. To push for legal reform in China, but also even outside of China globally. There's calls to make a decisive ban on all illegal wildlife trade internationally. I guess to put more attention and focus and priority to it again. It's not just, obviously this thing started in China. It seems like it started in China. And the Chinese are well known for having a pretty diverse array of things that they eat. And there's obviously a lot of damage done to wildlife species around the world and endangered species due to demand from China, but they're definitely not the only country. And I think there's a kind of, there's a temptation to just blame another race of people for the problems that we have in the world. But again, it comes back to this need to act cooperatively on a global scale. How can we do something like ban wildlife trade without unfairly impacting on poor people or people who use wildlife species for their daily subsistence, and maybe even the money they get from wildlife trade is important to them and their livelihoods. And if these are the poorest people in society, you've got to be careful about kind of sweeping laws on these subjects. All right, take it easy, man.
All right, we will talk to you soon. Enjoy. All right, thanks, Lee. We will check back in with you soon, so do well over there in Spain. So one thing that has been apparent across the world, not just here in the United States, but a lot of people are going online. Not only are they commuting from work digitally, but they're also, like you, probably a majority of you, just watching YouTube, watching Netflix. And a couple tips. One thing I thought was interesting is this one. The media regulator in Europe noted that if you don't use your microwave, your internet will go faster. And I chatted with a bunch of my students on Monday in video chats, and one thing was apparent that many of you have exhausted all of Netflix, including this show, Tiger King, which has actually reopened a cold case. Good job, all of you, for watching Netflix right now. However, if you are struggling to find something new to watch, or you want to find something good to read, I checked in with my buddy Chris, and to hear what he had to say about what you can find on Netflix and maybe some cool books that you might want to borrow online. So let's go over see Chris.
So there's one movie that it's on Netflix. It's called Time Trap, which I'm a big sci-fi nerd. Like, I love sci-fi of all sorts of genres. Sci-fi, horror, superhero, cyberpunk, everything that I love. It was this movie called Trap that was on my Netflix. I think it's Netflix. That the algorithm said I would like, and you watch it, this kind of piece of crap. I watched it, and it's definitely like a low budget out. This professor of archaeology finds this cave in the southeast U.S., and it's part of his hunt for the historical fountain of youth. And it turns out he goes in this cave, and time moves differently. So you're down there for 2 minutes, and it might be 100 years in the outside world. So there's all kinds of cool stuff. But that was one movie that I wasn't necessarily expecting to enjoy as much as I did. I could see there's only certain movies which I personally feel the need to see in a movie theater, and those are going to be the big visual kind of event movies, like Star Wars movies, Marvel movies, 3D IMAX type movies. I don't feel the need to go see The Town. The Town, for an example. Is The Town a cinematic experience? No. It's a great story, and anybody with a laptop and headphones is going to get a very similar experience in a dark room.
Versus, right? I went to see Dunkirk in IMAX because the visuals of that movie were raw of it.
Yeah. So those sorts of movies, I think, are going to maintain a place in, you need to see it in a theater to fully appreciate it, right? Those sorts of movies, I think, are going to continue to keep theaters alive, but, do you need to go to the theater to see the next Toy Story?
I mean, Toy Story 3 was pretty awesome, to be fair. However,
sure, but are you going to miss anything from it by viewing it on your home, on your TV?
The experience, I guess, is the only thing that movie theaters have going for it at this point. Is
right.
Hey, you can spend $100 for your family and get popcorn. Or you can just chill at home and do the same thing, but a smaller.
Exactly. Stephen King is my favorite author. The Dark Tower series is by far my favorite book series. I would put it up there with Lord of the Rings in terms of my own personal taste.
What book would you recommend starting with? So, like, Dark Tower
Stephen
series
King.
is dope, but would you say start with the series or start with something else other Stephen King otherwise?
So if you're trying to break into Stephen King, I would honestly recommend The Shining as your first read. It covers it all. It's got everything. It's got the crime aspects. It's got the noir aspects. It's got the supernatural, obviously. And it's got the film adaptation, which King really does not like. Whatever. The Shining is a good one. The Stand is like 1,000+ pages, so if you got the bandwidth for that, go for it.
But might freak you out about today's current predicament.
Well, is that, yeah. If you feel like getting a little current eventsy, go for it. But honestly, like if you want a series that is going to include all of what Stephen King has to offer, from supernatural to crime to battle with internal demons, the whole 9 yards, I would really, I can't recommend the Dark Tower series strongly enough.
All right, thanks for checking in, Chris. Thanks for the recommendations. Everyone else out there, if you have any shows, movies, or books that you have been reading, watching, enjoying, let me know. Comment below or email me down here. Now, certainly we've been doing a lot inside to keep entertained, but a lot of us have been getting outside, which is awesome. Talking to students on Monday, it's clear that a lot of us are going for walks, exploring nature. The news has been covering it as well. Certainly in the cities, people are trying to get out, getting in the parks, along rivers and oceans. In England, there's people that are going out trekking. So certainly people that are already used to going for long walks and staying away from people, this is kind of their time to shine, like myself. And there's not just a benefit of getting out of the house because you're all feeling cooped up, but there is health benefits too as well. So doctors say about 120 minutes a week outside is going to give you health benefits, which is awesome. That's about 17, 20 minutes a day. So not a whole lot. Once you get past about 5 hours, it's not going to do much more for you. So don't be like, I will be outside for 100 hours a week. That's not necessary. But it is actually proven that the more you're outside, the better. So one thing I wanted to start doing is while you are outside, you are going to start, the more you are out, notice trees and bushes and plants and birds and other things that you maybe not know what they are. So I'm going to be doing some identification little series for you. So today, to kick things off, we're going to look at the white pine. I'm going to show you how to identify a white pine, what they were used for, and how, in many ways, they're the most important part of sparking the American Revolution. So, first off, how do you know what is a white pine and what isn't a white pine? So I have a couple different pine trees next to me here. So first thing for a white pine, and for any tree, if you're trying to identify any tree, what you want to look at first is the leaf. Now, obviously, pine trees don't have leaves, but they do have needles. And what you can do for a white pine with the needles is, if you look at them close, you're going to see the needles are all grouped up in bunches. Now, each one of these bunches of needles is going to have 5 individual needles in there. So the other thing with these needles, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Other thing with these needles is they're fairly soft. They aren't going to hurt your hand or really poke you. So they're really nice needles, great needles. Versus the other pine that we see a lot around here on Cape Cod is the scrub pine. So scrub pine, I got a little one over here. And one thing with their clusters of needles is they only have 3 needles per cluster. So right off the bat, we get our needles. Second thing to identify a pine is going to be its bark. So with a white pine, on a younger tree, you're going to see this smooth, kind of dark gray bark. As it gets older, it'll get grayer. And once it gets really old, these trees get huge. Look at this thing. It's massive. I can't even barely reach around it. So, with a white pine, these trees get enormous. And not only are they enormous, which is a good identifier, but the older trees have these deeply furrowed bark, which is another identifier for it. And the final identifier is going to be the pine cones. So a white pine is going to have these long, 6 to 8 inch long cones that are pretty thin. And these are different from other pine trees that you're going to see, which you're probably more familiar with, of these short and squat pine cones. So those are 3 ways you identify it. The needles, there's 5 in a bunch. The bark, it's going to be smooth and gray, and then as it gets older, deeply furrowed. And third thing is the pine cones themselves. So why are these trees so cool other than how we identify them? Great question. So the wood of a white pine is really strong. It's really light. So it makes it ideal for woodworking, especially building. And if you notice as well, these trees are really straight, which means in the colonial days, the important thing for something that's very strong, very tall, and very straight are mass. So the British, as you hopefully know from your history classes, made their empire namely due to the strength of the British Navy, the Royal Navy. So King George I was cognizant of that, and he wanted to ensure that the ships of the British Royal Navy were the strongest. So he made a royal decree that all of the strongest and straightest and tallest trees in New England were his personal property, even if they're on your land. In 1692, the Massachusetts charter actually had it written in that these trees were to be property of the king. And what happened was yearly their surveyors, royal surveyors, would go out. They would mark the trees that they wanted for the Navy. And those trees were marked with what was known as the king's arrow, which they would use a hatchet and chop in 3 marks. So you'd have a top of the arrow and then a mark coming down for the bottom. So if you found a tree, especially if it was on your property, that was marked with the king's arrow, you couldn't cut it down. And if you were found to do so, you'd be fined a substantial amount of money. Now, this really didn't cause a whole lot of problems because colonists were saying, well, we don't really care, we're going to do it anyways. And they would chop down the trees, remove the mark, and then use the lumber. So in 1772, a group of surveyors from the governor of New Hampshire set out, and they want to see if anyone has been chopping down some of the king's trees. And in the city of Weir, not sure how you pronounce it, it's a bit northwest of Manchester, New Hampshire, a lumber mill is found to have some trees bearing the king's mark. The owners are fined money, however they refuse to pay, so a constable is sent out with his deputy to go arrest these men, and instead the lawmen are met with a mob of citizens in the town, angry that their trees are not theirs, that they can't have rights over them. And they pull the men out of bed one morning at an inn and beat them mercilessly with branches from white pines and then run off into the woods. Eventually they're arrested, they're fined, but it's really this early act of resistance by the Americans. So 1772, we're not too far from a lot of other acts of resistance happening, Boston Tea Party. So it's really one of the first instances of colonists fighting against British rule. Now, the white pine, its prominence didn't begin in 1772 as a symbol of New England. In fact, Massachusetts started minting the pine tree shilling, and that was, check my notes, 1667.
So the currency that the state or the colony was creating had a pine tree on it. And in the 1780s, ships that came from New England, since they were so proud of these pines that were being sent all around the world as ships or for ships, they created a flag called the Flag of New England that had a white pine prominently in the top left corner. The New England Revolution soccer team today still uses it as one of their symbols. So the white pine for New England not only is an important symbol of the shipping industry, of resistance, but also of the unique habitat that we have here. These trees are really not found outside of the East Coast. So go on out, find yourself a white pine, and enjoy it. Today, we're making pizza. All right, pizza's a really very easy recipe. My ingredient list is 5 ingredients long. However, the first thing to know about pizza is you are going to need a day in advance. So if you're going to tonight be like, oh, I'm going to make pizza, well, make some dough today, and then tomorrow you can make the sweet, sweet pizza. You are going to let the dough sit for at least 24 hours, so it's one of those plan ahead meals. So I'm going to make some dough right now. I'm going to check in tomorrow and finish making some sweet, sweet za. So, things you're going to start with, actually, the things you need. All you need for pizza is the following: water, flour, yeast, salt, oil. Olive oil, preferable. If you have any other oil, works just fine. A couple notes. First thing on the water. So first thing I'm going to do is activate the yeast by putting it in the water. I'm going with some active dry yeast here. You can buy it in the packets. I bake a lot, so I bought it in the jar. Yeast is what's going to make your dough rise. So it starts eating the sugars that are either added by you or sugars that are in the flour itself. And it's going to release gases, and those gases are what's going to form those small bubbles in whatever you're baking. That's going to leaven it. That's going to make that bread rise. So with the water, first thing I'm going to do is 1 3/4 cup of water. You don't want the water to be too hot. Yeast, this is dried yeast, but it's alive. So if you put in really hot water, it's going to kill the yeast, so your bread's not going to rise. So first thing is, when you are mixing this dough, make sure that your water is something that you could put your finger into that's not going to burn you. And if you're trying to be tough, like, haha, I can put my finger in any hot water, well, it's not a smart move because yeast is not as tough as you are. So it should just be pleasantly warm, a lukewarm water. And then once I get the yeast, it's going to sit there for a bit. So you want to wait until that yeast is activated, that yeast is coming back alive. Essentially what you're putting in here is freeze-dried yeast. So you want to let it get back to life. So we're going to put yeast in the water, let it sit. We're going to add in our flour, our salt, and our olive oil. And then I'm going to knead it, throw it in the fridge, and then tomorrow we're going to make some pizza. Let's go. All right, so when you start kneading the bread, the dough, so when you start kneading the dough, it's going to be sticky. It's going to be just, the dough hasn't really come together much, so it's not very stretchy. It's just going to feel like it breaks apart. So really what you're doing when you're kneading is you're stretching the glutens out. So you're making sure that what bonds that we have forming in this dough is going to make that really nice and chewy bread that or dough on a pizza that you want. Right now I'm going to cut it up, 4 pieces, put it in the fridge, and we'll check back tomorrow. All right, day 2. New outfit, same dough. So overnight, it's been about 12 hours. It's been about 24 hours. And the dough, if you can see it, I'm not sure if you can, has a ton of little bubbles in there, so that means the yeast has been working. It has been rising the dough. But since it's in the fridge, if it's a cooler temperature, it's not going to rise as much. If that dough had been sitting on the counter, it would have been way larger. So the cold slows down the yeast activity. So what I want to do now, since this dough is pretty cold, I want to let it sit for about 30 minutes. So I'm going to roll into some balls, put it in some flour, and just let it sit for 30 minutes. And then after that, then I can work with it, add some toppings, and throw it in the oven. So let's do that. So it's been about 30 minutes. The dough has risen a bit. So what I'm going to do now is make some circles of the dough. They're about 8 to 10 inch pizzas here. And add some sauce, add some toppings. The 2 types of pizza I'm going to make. One is a sopressado. I'm terrible at pronouncing words. Sopressado pizza, which is a cured sausage. And I'm also going to do a sardine pizza with some red peppers and jalapenos. So those are the 2 pizzas for tonight. One of the pizzas I am going to cook just on a pan, and the other pizza I'm going to cook in a skillet. Now the nice thing about cooking with a skillet is that the heat from it's going to really crisp up that crust nicely. And I currently have the skillet heating in the oven right now at 550 degrees. Whatever the hottest temperature you can have for pizza is better. So you want it to cook really quickly. If you have a great pizza oven at home, if you can get up to 700-800 degrees, that's going to be awesome. So you don't want to cook pizza slow, you want to cook them really fast. Which means you also want to make sure that whatever surface you're putting it on has been preheated so it can cook at the bottom as well. So whatever you're going to do to cook it, make sure it's hot already in there. So let's get some pizzas going. Here we go. The best part. That's pretty much how you make some pizza. Give yourself 24 hours in advance for the dough. Put together whatever toppings you want. It doesn't matter. Make a topping bar. Make 4 little pies. Have everyone in the house make their own. Everyone's happy. I'm going to go eat these pizzas. I'm going to go finish editing this show. And we'll catch y'all next time. Thanks for watching.